something else there for a moment. You can tell the musicians they adjust the microphone to suit themselves. Last couple of years there was a rostrum here, so that we could lean on it as we got halfway through our speech, but that's not here this year. It must be the cutbacks, is it? Starting to take effect. Look, this is absolutely tremendous. When I was here last year, I thought the numbers then had increased. This year, we see the bulk of the people who were here last year have come again, and yet we've got new people among us. And this movement, this campaign to change the date to a more appropriate date than the date that one race invaded the nation of another race, is increasing. It's not going to go away, because so long as they've got Australia Day, we will be here. And the good news from the mainland is that a lot of Aboriginal groups, particularly in Sydney and Brisbane and Canberra, contacted me, sent down all these emails, made these phone calls, and encouraged us here in Tasmania to join in the national campaign of protest to raise the campaign about changing the date. And I had to say, listen fellas, you're a bit bloody late. We've been doing this for donkey's ages. But to their credit, the discussion amongst most Aboriginal groups on the mainland, which has centred around in the last decade, all these Aboriginal concerts held on Invasion Day as some sort of a gesture of protest against celebrating Invasion Day, is now being questioned by Aboriginal groups on the mainland, and a lot of people have seen that in Tasmania this protest here, this campaign to change the date has been growing and growing, and the mainland Aboriginal groups are now saying we have to do the same. And we have to admit, of course, that the campaign hasn't yet gripped amongst those great leaders in the federal parliament, or for that matter in the state parliament. I wrote off to Her Majesty Quentin Bryce, Governor-General of Australia, whatever her title is, said, listen, Governor-General, when you give your speech about Australia Day, remember what the date signifies. It's not just a date that's plucked out of the air, it's the date that the British came to Australia, and the celebration is about their coming, which makes it race-based. So, Governor-General, when you give your big speech, stand up and say something about we need to reconsider the date. I also wrote off to John Faulkner and Doug Cameron. These are members of the left wing of the Labor Party. Now, if you can find the left wing of the Labor Party, come and show me where it is, but they call themselves left wing. And I called on them to make a stand. You know, you stand up for the union, you stand up for these rights, you stand up for those rights. How about standing up and asking the nation to change the date? Of the three of them, not a single acknowledgement. So, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. And we also have to acknowledge that the impact of this gathering and the letter writing, the political statements, the articles written by Greg Barnes and others, does have an effect. Because it's only recently that I've seen the Australia Day Council adverts being more and more dishonest. All of a sudden, their adverts that are costing millions and millions of dollars, money that could have gone to the Aboriginal community for decent services, is spent on these propaganda adverts about Aboriginal children rejoicing under the white flag, about Aborigines dancing and calling it our culture, our collective culture. So what the Australia Day Council is trying to portray is that most Aboriginal people enjoy celebrating January 26th. Now that is an out-and-out lie paid for out of the public purse. Where's drugs and alcohol? Where is he? David Sainty was telling me on the way down that there's an ad on SBS television that shows an Aboriginal person coming out of the Aboriginal flag and floating into the Australian flag. Again, it's all part of the propaganda campaign to try to convey a false impression that there is no issue And the campaign that we're all part of today is not aimed at targeting anybody in an adverse way. We're not abusing anybody. We're not making demands on anybody. All we're saying is start thinking about this issue. And if we can get the debate going and people have to justify why January 26th is the date that has been chosen, then we win, because there is no logic behind claiming a national day, all of which is in other countries is about either reunification or independence. But Australia is the one nation that stands alone in the nations of the world that uses a national day based on the coming to the country of one particular race. And if we can engage people in that debate, I have no doubt that we will win. When I think about where this date was plucked from, January 26th, to the best of my knowledge, it was plucked out of the air in 1838 by a group of people in Sydney. And they believed that they should celebrate the coming to Sydney of the British. Now keep in mind that if a national day is about unification and giving everybody something to celebrate, just think that 8 years before that group in Sydney declared January 26th as the appropriate day, 8 years earlier they were still killing Aborigines here in Tasmania. And if these people had the mentality of inclusion, 8 years earlier they were killing our people. And then in 60 years later, they had the chance to once again change their attitude and include Aboriginal people when they formed the Constitution of Australia in 1901. Its only reference to Aborigines was to exclude us from the nation of Australia, and we were not to be counted as citizens. So all of these things about the inheritance of something that existed 160, 170 years ago by a group of people in Sydney is somehow binding on modern Australia, and with the politicians not prepared to take a lead to encourage people to question why they are bound by the views of people back in 1838 is the reason the change of date is being held up. And for those people who think that, look, you know, how long are we going to maintain this campaign, I remind all of us that there were people sitting in prison in South Africa in the 1960s. A man called Nelson Mandela must have thought he was going to die in that prison, and yet he never gave up the campaign for something that he believed was right. And 30 years later, he became the President of South Africa. If we have right on our side, all we have to do is not maintain the rage, but maintain the campaign. Yes, it is true that the commercialism has taken over the Australian flag and the production of all these Australian colours for January 26th. I noticed when I went to that popular supermarket Woolworths, they've got the massive Australian flag up the side of the building. I didn't see any Aboriginal flag there, and so someone needs to go and see them. Di? Yeah, Di will do it. Go and see them and say, well, when in Aborigines Week, you're going to fly the Aboriginal flag up there and you're going to sell Aboriginal flags the same way as you promote all of these Australian flags. Because the whole point of this, supermarkets, commercial industries, they are corporate citizens of Australia, and they have a responsibility to all of their customers, not just the ones who take a particular political view of celebrating an event. And when you consider that great public media outlet, the ABC, who are meant to educate in their charter, to inform and to reflect the cultural diversity of their audience, why is it that all of the ABC commentators and newsreaders wish everybody a happy Australia Day when they sign off? So we have got work to do, but I think that we're on the right track. If something is right then it's just a matter of persevering, and persevere we will. Because what do we want? Change the date. When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
Change the date!
When do we want it?
Now!
I like it.